She was only 23, a nursing student, full of light, full of plans. One evening, she met a man from a dating app. The next morning, she was dead. What came next would leave a family shattered and a city asking how this could happen. A police response that felt cold, evidence left behind, and a silence that spoke volumes. Behind the headlines, a darker story began to unfold, one that raises urgent questions about race, justice, and whose stories are truly heard. This is the case of Lauren Smith Fields. And it is not over. Lauren Smith Fields was 23 years old, a college student at Norwalk Community College, working toward a degree in physical therapy. She was focused, she was organized, and she had plans, big ones. She talked often about opening her own practice, helping others heal, building something meaningful from the ground up. Her days were filled with classes, studying, and time with family. Her closest friends described her as soft-spoken, kind, always quick to laugh. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but when she did speak, people listened. She loved fashion, beauty, and skincare. She had an Instagram page where she posted about her life, her goals, and her favorite looks. She was confident, but never arrogant. She cared deeply about how she presented herself, not for attention, but because she believed in showing up fully for herself. Her mother, Chantel, said Lauren was her best friend. They spoke every day, sometimes multiple times a day. She wasn't someone who disappeared. She wasn't someone who didn't call back. Her father called her his little girl, even at 23. Video clips show Lauren smiling at birthday dinners, walking through parks with her brothers, laughing over her phone. A young woman, fully alive, her eyes lit with something no camera could fully capture. But in December 2021, a Bumble date would change everything. She had matched with a 37-year-old man, older, a bit outside her usual type, but still polite. They exchanged messages. He seemed normal, respectful. Lauren invited him over for a casual night in. No parties, no clubs, just her own apartment. She bought a bottle of tequila, lit candles, set out a movie. Hours later, she was dead. And from the moment police arrived, the focus wasn't on the questions, it was on the assumptions. The man told them they had a good night, that they'd been drinking, that she'd fallen asleep, and when he woke up, she wasn't breathing. No obvious trauma, no visible injuries, and yet something felt wrong. Something about that night wasn't adding up. And for Lauren's family, the nightmare was only just beginning. December 11th, 2021. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. Lauren had made plans with someone she'd recently met, Matthew LaFountain. He was 37 years old, she was 23. They connected through Bumble, exchanged messages, and decided to meet at her apartment. No restaurants, no bars, just a night in. According to Matthew, they drank tequila together, took shots, shared food, watched a movie. At some point, he said they smoked marijuana. He told police the conversation flowed, that everything felt relaxed, that Lauren laughed, chatted, and eventually got tired. He claimed she fell asleep beside him. He said he stayed there through the night, and when he woke up the next morning, around 6:30 a.m., she was cold, unresponsive, not breathing. That's when he called 911. Not her mother, not her brother, not a neighbor, just the authorities. He followed instructions, he said. But it was already too late. The officers who responded found no immediate signs of foul play. No broken items, no blood, no bruising. Nothing that would stop the case from being categorized at first glance as anything but a routine call. And so, Matthew LaFountain was never handcuffed, never brought in for formal questioning. He gave his statement and left. Everything that happened that night, every detail, was taken almost entirely at his word. There was no search of his phone, no request to review his messages with Lauren, no deep forensic analysis of the apartment, and the only person who could have offered another version of what took place, was gone. Lauren's family didn't even know she had gone on a date that night. They didn't know she was with someone new, and they certainly weren't prepared for what came next. A young woman had died under unclear circumstances, and the man who was with her simply walked away. For those who loved Lauren, one thing became painfully clear in the days that followed. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was the beginning of a fight for answers, and that fight was only just beginning. Lauren Smith Fields was pronounced dead at the scene. No one called her mother, no one contacted her brother, no officer arrived at her family's door. Instead, her loved ones learned of her death through a note, handwritten and taped to her apartment door by the landlord. That was how they found out she was gone. The note simply said, "If you're looking for Lauren, call this number." Her mother stood outside the door, confused. Her brother called the number. That's when the nightmare began. They rushed to the police department, desperate for answers. But what they received instead were vague reassurances and a single line they would hear again and again: "Wait for the toxicology report." From the beginning, it was clear something wasn't right. The apartment hadn't been sealed. Her belongings hadn't been secured. There was no evidence of a real investigation. No fingerprints were taken. No DNA swabs collected. No thorough forensic sweep of the scene. The man she was last with, Matthew LaFountain, was not questioned beyond his initial statement. He was allowed to leave without a second look. Her wallet was missing. A used condom was later discovered. Drugs were found. Still, the case was treated as nothing more than a routine overdose. To her family, it felt like Lauren had been erased, written off before the full story could even be told. Lauren's brother would later say, "They treated her like she was nothing, like she didn't matter." And online, that same question echoed again and again. Would this case have been handled differently if Lauren looked different? As the days passed and the silence continued, public outrage began to build. People demanded answers. Advocates spoke out. Her name trended across social media, not just because of how she died, but because of what didn't happen after. Weeks passed. There were no arrests, no follow-ups, no updates. And then, finally, the toxicology report was released. It listed 4 substances in Lauren's system: fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, and alcohol. The official cause of death: acute intoxication due to the combined effects of fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, and alcohol. The manner of death was ruled accidental. But to her family, it wasn't just a conclusion. It was a betrayal. Because Lauren had no known history of drug use, no pattern of behavior, no prior incidents. And fentanyl? Her mother said she was terrified of it. Her brother said she'd never touch it. Her friends said it didn't fit who she was, at all. She avoided drugs. She was focused on her future. So how did a deadly cocktail of substances, especially one as lethal as fentanyl, end up in her system? The report gave no answers. It didn't say where the drugs came from. It didn't say who provided them. And no further investigation was launched to find out. No search of Matthew LaFountain's phone. No follow-up interview. No re-examination of the apartment. Her family was left with a clinical report and a closed door. The state had ruled her death accidental, without ever fully asking how those drugs got into her body in the first place. For many, it raised the one question law enforcement never seemed willing to ask. What if she didn't take the drugs willingly? What if someone else gave them to her, without consent, without warning? To this day, no one has been held accountable. There were substances. There was a body. But no crime, they said. Her family was told to accept that Lauren had made a mistake, that what happened was unfortunate, but not suspicious. But they never believed that, and neither did the thousands of people who were now watching her case unfold. Because if Lauren didn't take those drugs herself, then who did? The silence didn't last long. As word of Lauren's death began to spread, so did the questions. Why wasn't her family notified? Why was there no real investigation? Why was the man who was last with her allowed to walk away without so much as a second look? And then, something shifted. People began to speak out. Hashtags emerged across social media. Justice for Lauren Smith Fields. Say her name. Black women deserve justice. Thousands of posts, millions of views. Users drew comparisons to other high-profile cases. Cases where white victims had gone missing or were found dead, and the response from law enforcement had been immediate, urgent, and thorough. Lauren's case, in contrast, felt quiet, dismissive, neglected. And the message people heard loudest wasn't from the police. It was from their silence. Accusations of racial bias quickly followed. Commenters asked, would this have been handled differently if Lauren were white? Would there have been more media coverage? A nationwide search? An arrest? Even local protests began to form. Dozens gathered in front of the Bridgeport Police Department. Signs were held. Candles were lit. Voices were raised. Lauren's family refused to wait any longer. They hired a private investigator. They pushed for an independent autopsy. They reached out to civil rights attorneys. And then, celebrities joined in. Cardi B, Bobby Brown, Claudia Jordan, Amanda Seales. Each one sharing Lauren's name, her face, her story. Not because it was trending, but because too many stories like hers never get told. They asked why mainstream media had ignored the case. They asked why the officers involved hadn't been held accountable. They asked what message was being sent to every other Black family watching. What began as grief had become something more, a movement. Because Lauren wasn't just a statistic. She wasn't a story to be buried in a file. She was a daughter, a sister, a human being. And the people who loved her weren't asking for sympathy. They were demanding justice. By January 2022, the pressure could no longer be ignored. Lauren Smith Fields' family had waited. They had pleaded. They had demanded answers. But when none came, they took a stand, publicly and without hesitation. They held a press conference. Standing before reporters, they called out the Bridgeport Police Department directly. They accused the officers involved of negligence. They criticized the lack of communication. They questioned the complete failure to treat Lauren's death as a potential crime scene. And they made their next move clear. They threatened legal action. The family announced plans to sue the city of Bridgeport and its police department for civil rights violations, citing the department's failure to follow basic investigative protocol. The message was unmistakable. If the system wouldn't hold itself accountable, they would force it to. Within days, the pressure began to yield results. Bridgeport police announced an internal investigation. 2 detectives were suspended for mishandling Lauren's case. Their names were not initially released, but their actions, or lack of action, were now under public scrutiny. It was the first real acknowledgement that something had gone wrong, and soon, attention reached the state level. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont publicly addressed the case, calling for a full investigation into how the death had been handled. He stated that every family, regardless of race or background, deserves transparency, communication, and equal treatment under the law. The Bridgeport City Council followed, promising to review police procedures, particularly around how and when families are notified of a loved one's death. Because Lauren's family didn't just lose a daughter. They were denied the right to be with her in her final moments, denied the truth in those crucial early hours, denied dignity when they needed it most. And the community saw it. What started as a quiet case was now a statewide issue, sparking conversations, investigations, and the early signs of change. But for the people who knew Lauren, justice wasn't just about suspensions or policy updates. It was about something deeper, making sure what happened to Lauren never happens again. As the dust settled, one thing remained: unanswered questions. The toxicology report confirmed a lethal mix of substances in Lauren's system, but it never explained how those substances got there. Matthew LaFountain claimed they drank, watched a movie, and went to sleep. But Lauren was found dead, and somehow that version of events was accepted, without challenge, without resistance. So the questions began. Did he slip her something? Did she knowingly consume fentanyl, or was it introduced without her knowledge? Why wasn't he treated as a suspect from the start? Why wasn't the apartment sealed off as a potential crime scene? Why weren't fingerprints taken, DNA collected, or the room photographed with forensic precision? For a case involving the unexplained death of a healthy 23-year-old woman, the lack of standard investigative protocol was alarming, and that left room for speculation. Some believed Lauren may have been targeted. Others questioned whether this was a setup, if someone saw opportunity and acted on it, believing no one would ask the hard questions. And then there was the question of motive. Was it negligence, or something more calculated? Was this just a tragic oversight by the police, or the cover-up of something far more disturbing? There were no signs of struggle, no open wounds, no screaming heard by neighbors. But that didn't mean no harm was done. Sometimes violence leaves no mark. Sometimes it wears a friendly face. And sometimes the truth isn't loud. It's buried in silence. The public began piecing the puzzle together on their own. Some pointed to the age difference. Some to the power imbalance. Some to the systemic failures that seem to resurface whenever the victim is a woman of color. In the end, no charges were filed. No one was arrested. No clear answers were ever given. But the questions still linger. And perhaps they always will, unless someone, somewhere, finally chooses to tell the full story. And that's where you come in. Think critically. Ask why. And don't forget her name. Lauren Smith Fields. As of early 2024, no charges have been filed in connection with the death of Lauren Smith Fields. No arrests, no indictments, no accountability. Matthew LaFountain remains a free man. He was never officially declared a suspect, and to this day, he has not been charged with any crime. For Lauren's family, the fight continues. They have not stopped. They've held marches, filed lawsuits, appeared on national television, sat across from lawmakers. Their mission is clear: to make sure what happened to Lauren doesn't happen to anyone else. Her death sparked national outrage, but it also sparked something more enduring: a long overdue conversation about how the justice system responds when Black women are found dead under suspicious circumstances. Why are some lives met with urgency while others are met with silence? In the months that followed Lauren's death, her case became a rallying cry for families across the country facing similar pain. In response, Bridgeport city officials announced reforms to how police notify next of kin. 2 detectives connected to the mishandling of the case were suspended, and under growing legal pressure, the city now faces an ongoing civil lawsuit filed by Lauren's family. In the state of Connecticut, lawmakers introduced discussions around legislation to ensure timely and respectful communication with families, particularly in cases involving young women of color. Still, no criminal trial, no definitive closure. Lauren's family continues to push for federal intervention. They've called for broader oversight and for the Department of Justice to examine how her case was handled from day one. And while the media spotlight may have faded, their fight hasn't. Every day, her mother wakes up knowing justice has not yet been served. Every day, her name is spoken by people who refuse to let her story disappear. Because Lauren Smith Fields was more than a case. She was a daughter, a sister, a young woman full of potential. And though the system failed her in life, her story may still lead to change. Justice may be delayed, but her memory is not forgotten. This is where the case stands now. And for those still watching, one thing remains. Keep asking, keep pushing, until there are answers. She was more than a headline, more than a report, more than a case file. Lauren Smith Fields was a daughter, a sister, a best friend. She had dreams, she had a future, and she had time until someone took it from her. Her family continues to live with the silence, the unanswered calls, the hollow responses, and the image of a young woman full of light, gone too soon without justice. In the words of her mother, Lauren deserved to grow old. She deserved to be heard. Her brother said, "They treated her like she was nothing, but to us, she was everything." To the world, she became a symbol. To her family, she remains a heartbeat that never stops echoing. And now, it's up to all of us. Share her story. Don't let it disappear into another forgotten file. Say her name, not just in hashtags, but in conversations, in classrooms, in courtrooms. Demand more. Because every victim deserves dignity. Every family deserves answers. And justice should never be determined by skin color, zip code, or silence. If what happened to Lauren makes you feel something, don't let that feeling fade. Speak out, show up, ask questions, write to your lawmakers, support the families still searching for truth. Because this isn't just about one case, it's about how many times this happens and no one hears. Lauren's life mattered, and the fight for her is far from over. This story doesn't end with a verdict. It ends with action. Yours. Justice for Lauren Smith Fields, and justice for every voice still waiting to be heard.